A very warm good afternoon to everyone who has joined us today. Welcome to today's discussion. Today we are seeking to broaden our intellectual horizon by looking towards an area where we would like to do more work in the future, and which is a very interesting area, which is the Nordics and the Scandinavian countries. And joining us in this endeavor today is an impressive list of panelists moderated by Professor Gulshan Sachdeva. And our panelists for the day are Professor Bhasi Sarkar from JNU, Dr. Heki Matela from Webster University, Geneva, Mr. Pratik Karlekar from Europe Shared Services Tech Mahindra, and Ms. Christabel Royan from Nordic Center in India. So welcome to all of you. Before I request our secretary to make the inaugural remarks, as is usual, some housekeeping rules. While a speaker is speaking, I would request and urge everyone to kindly keep their mics muted so that we do not have any trouble listening to the panelists. And there is a chat box for your comments and interventions. We also have a dedicated session towards the end where we would try and take question and answers. And before we go on to today's discussion, I would now request our Secretary, CPV-NOIA, and Chairman of ICM to give his opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Surabhi, for organizing this another webinar on an issue that is of great importance. I welcome all the participants at the webinar, and Surabhi, this is a very impressive list that ICM has put together. I must also do some advertising for ICM. The Indian Center for Migration seeks to become a premier think tank on migration-related issues and work as an independent, autonomous think tank within MEA and provide inputs on policy, and also further the discussion that we wish to have with all stakeholders. Over the course of the last couple of years, ICM has grown in strength in terms of its research abilities, in terms of its collaborations with international organizations, as well as institutions, academic institutions, think tanks, and other stakeholders in the migration arena. And we hope that you will continue to support the efforts of ICM. Before I come to the topic, I wanted to mention that the pandemic that we are going through has brought into sharp focus the importance of migration. We had always assumed that this was a natural human tendency for migration and mobility. But we've seen that there have been certain limitations to the flow of migration that have come about because of the pandemic. Earlier, we had seen that the remarkable technological transformations that have been happening around us, as well as the economic changes in countries across the world, the trend of mobility had changed. We had noticed how skills, professionals were becoming more in demand. We'd also noticed, and this has become more obvious today, that there are new migration corridors that are opening up. So while the mainstay of Indian migrants continues to be the Gulf region, where many of our low-skilled workers go, we've seen that there is a growing tendency of more skilled workers going into that region as well. But more importantly, that what I was saying earlier, new migration pathways are opening up. Some of these are in East Asia. We see increasing signs of skilled workers in particular, and certain professionals from India being highly sought in parts of East Asia. We've also seen such trends in parts of Europe, and in particular in Eastern Europe, as well as in Northern Europe, and also along the Mediterranean coast, where we see new demands. We as a government wish to take advantage of these developments, and so that we can optimize the mobility flows that our citizens can have and the opportunities that they can have in countries beyond. And therefore, it is our endeavor, since our motto is to have safe and legal migration, we also wish to make this regular migration and mobility. And therefore, we had some years ago started a project with the European Union, which was our common agenda on migration and mobility, to bring about a common understanding between India and the EU states so that we could have more structured, regular flows of the mobility of professionals, of highly skilled workers, the movement of students as well, and to put it into a framework. And under this, we have already negotiated certain mobility and migration partnership agreements. We've done these with Denmark and with the UK, which is today outside the European Union, of course. We've also been negotiating this with several others. We've done this with France, and we are doing this with Germany, and we're also in discussions with some of the countries on the Mediterranean coast. We see that the Danish example can probably be something that we can extend to the Nordic countries, to all the Nordic countries, and perhaps we can have a national legislation plus kind of a mechanism. What we would like to see is that we can have a needs assessment of the kinds of requirements that these countries have. And I mean, today's discussion, of course, is in Northern Europe and Scandinavia in particular, but this would apply in all our negotiations with other countries to see what your national requirements are, and then how we fit in for a structured flow of movements. And we would be very happy to provide IT professionals, healthcare professionals, nursing professionals, with increasing age in parts of Europe for caregivers. We can also look at certain skills that are now running into lower numbers. But what we would wish to do is to see that we can, through our discussions, achieve at what we would say are a win-win solution. So in other words, we should have this dialogue between governments as well. And so your inputs today would be extremely useful on how we can, at the government level, work out these things so that the free market can then fill in the requirements that there are in these cases and have them in legal and regular forms. Along with this, and we've also done social security agreements with some of our partners in the European Union, is that the very high level of social security commitments that professionals and workers have in some of these countries, that there can be an offsetting effort, because today we see a situation where a lot, and that's why we talk more in terms of mobility, we see a situation where, given the dynamic economic situation in India is one where an increased number of people eventually come back to India after their working years to spend their retirement years in India. And so this aspect of social security agreements becomes very relevant. We, of course, have already enacted, undertaken direct the benefits of double taxation agreements so that can be avoided with virtually every country in Europe. And now the social security, with the ones that we haven't done, is to be done as well. The additional feature that I wanted to also mention is that one of the ways is that we have an enabling mechanism and instruments through which the facilitation of students is enhanced, because when you get a bunch of bright youngsters who are joining universities in countries overseas, there is a very strong likelihood that they develop certain linkages and bonds which would enable them to continue to work and contribute to those societies where they have obtained their higher education. And therefore, this mobility for students is an extremely important factor. And of course, we have seen that there are several countries across the world, the US, Australia, New Zealand, the UK, many of the European countries as well, which have taken advantage of this huge opportunity. And the last point that I wanted to mention is that this is not simply a one-way street. The changing economic environment, as I was saying earlier, which I referred to, India is today one of the fastest growing economies, according to the IMF projections. We shall be back as the fastest growing economy from next year. The pandemic had hit us, of course, but starting next year, we shall again become the fastest growing economy. And what this has meant with the improved business climate is that there are a very large amount of investments that come into our country from overseas. And this also brings in the opportunities not just for investments, but for overseas employment of foreigners coming into India. So the mobility aspects that, of course, today the emphasis is much more on the Indians going there. But I think what will become equally important in the days to come is that of foreign nationals coming to India for jobs. The changing nature of jobs, the kind of advances that are being made in many of the tech areas in India will make this a very attractive place for people to live in. And as I said earlier, since most Indians wish to return to India for their retirement, this is something that even our foreign nationals might consider. So it's a very rich topic. I once again wish to thank all the participants for joining in this forum. What you will say will be very useful for us in understanding the situation and also in providing and working on a framework for policy in consultation with all stakeholders so that we can make this a mutually advantageous situation. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share some of my thoughts, Surabhi, and it's back to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you indeed. Some of the points that you very rightly mentioned about needs assessment, about student mobility, and about mobility itself being a two-way street. We hope to hear more on those lines from our panel. Let me not waste any more time and invite our moderator for the day, Professor Gulshan Sachdeva. Professor Gulshan Sachdeva is a very well-known name in the academic circles. He's the Jean Monnet Chair, Coordinator, Jean Monnet Center of Excellence, Chairperson, Center for European Studies, School of International Studies, JNU. He's also Editor-in-Chief of International Studies, a very important journal on international relations. He's the book series editor of Europe, Asia Connectivity, brought out by Palgrave Macmillan. And he headed the ADB and Asia Foundation projects on regional cooperation at the Afghan Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Kabul. His research focus is diverse. It's on Europe, Eurasia, Afghanistan, development cooperation and connectivity. And with that impressive CV, needless to mention that he has contributed more than 100 research papers in academic journals and books. So over to you, Professor Sachdeva, for carrying out today's proceedings.
You need to unmute.
Sachdeva?
Yeah, sorry. No, I was just telling, I said, there is a serious problem of connectivity in the university suddenly. So if I'm disconnected, please take over. And thank you. Yeah. And, Mr. Sanjay Bhattacharya, Mr. Abagani Ramu, Dr. Surbhi Singh, of course, and the members of the panel discussion, Professor Sarkar, Dr. Heike Matela, Mr. Pratik Karlekar, Ms. Christabel Royal, ladies and gentlemen. Now, welcome to the panel on international labor let me inviting me to moderate. I'm glad, in fact, as in the beginning, you also mentioned also that you're looking now at specific regions within looking. I participated in a couple of other early discussions on Europe or EU earlier within ICM itself. Because when we discuss broader European issues, the discussion is normally focused on UK, Germany, Italy, France, etc. because of this. But now we know that a lot of new opportunities for labor mobility is opening up in recent Eastern Europe. Saying the region, another which interests to read this. Now, if anyone get an opportunity to work or study in some of these countries, I think this is one of the best places for study or work. These are, of course, small countries. All together, you have about 25 to 20 million population. And these are also countries which are perhaps best governed in the world. And it's not just prosperous. I think they're very innovative. They're also more equal than many other Western countries. Now, they're also seriously working for climate change and green technologies. And, for many years, I've talked about Nordic welfare, which is a kind of high living standards and low income disparity. These countries, the higher top, where you look at the index, you look at the happiness index, you look at innovation index, and in the few years, not just India-EU relations have become closer, but we also had, we are also very Nordic carefully. We had the first India Nordic Summit in Stockholm in 2018. Since then, we have seen large number of the part. And we had a bilateral summit here, and then we have the Green Partnership with Denmark. And as your concept note highlights, we also have different mobility-related bilateral agreements with some of the Nordic countries. Now, due to their demographic profile, can you hear me?
Voice
Hello?
is breaking in between, sir. So maybe you could try switching off the
audible?
video, and maybe it will. Yes, but
Yes,
your voice
because,
is breaking in between. But maybe you could try switching off the video. That will help the quality.
I did, yes, I did. Okay, now, due to, I think, the demographic profile, I think the most EU countries, particularly the Nordic countries, now I think will continue to source outside labor, particularly skilled workforce. Now, with appropriate policy framework, I think India is in a right position to provide required workforce to these countries because of its youthful population and an elaborate higher educational infrastructure. But I think we also need to understand evolving political economy dynamic. There is the rise of right-wing political parties all over Europe, and the Nordic region is obviously not untouched. So even if the refugee numbers in the last few years have come down drastically since the peak of 2015, but I think the migration issue is still very much alive. Now, despite this, about 20,000 work permits for Indians were issued by the Nordic region every year. Now, in the last few years, about 10,000 from Sweden, and I think from 10,000 from the rest of the countries. Since maybe I'll come back later when the connectivity is better. Now, to discuss these issues, now we have very powerful panel. The first panelist is Professor Bhasi Sarkar. She is a colleague here with the Center for European Studies, professor here of the European Studies. She also specializes on migration, particularly immigration integration, including minority rights, the Nordic and education and skill development. She was also awarded Yomane Chair in Democracy, Diversity and European Identity in the EU last year. And she has recently written a book, Balancing the Nation State in Eastern Europe, the Hungarian Experience. Over to you, Professor Sarkar. I hopefully by the time you finish, maybe my connectivity will be better because I'm just working on my hotspot. So that's the reason things are bad. Sorry. Please, Professor Sarkar.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Gulshan, for inviting me. I think I should first thank Indian Center for Migration for organizing, first of all, for organizing this event, for looking at the Nordics and inviting me to be a part of this panel discussing mobility issues and the Nordic and India. If you look at, I mean, many of the things have already been, flagged in terms of when we look at India and the Nordics and mobility. I think we need to understand about this whole issue of mobility also in the context of India-Nordic relations, generally how it has been. So we see that India has established relations with the Nordic countries way back almost immediately after independence. And as mentioned by Professor Sachdeva, the recent 2018 summit, India-Nordic summit, was actually a kind of a boost to that relation, which means that India also indicated that India is looking at this area, this region seriously. It needs to look at this region seriously also because what has been mentioned in terms of how these small countries have been performing extremely well and consistently on various indicators, be it development, be overall development, be it innovation, be it technological development, and along with that also what we like when we talk about a holistic life, right? So we talk about happiness, we talk about democracy. So on all of these parameters, we see that the Nordic countries have developed extremely well and performing extremely well. So they in one sense, when we are talking about looking at migration or looking at mobility, these are interesting and destinations. These are destinations where one would like to actually be moving to. So if we look at the Nordic countries, the other thing which stands out is their welfare model. So one is that, of course, what as we said, the various parameters on which they have been performing consistently well, but the other is also that they have this unique welfare model, which is a kind of a very different model where we talk about high taxes that there are in the Nordics, but at the same time, once those taxes are collected, the state takes the responsibility of looking after education, healthcare, pension, and it has been doing it well to the satisfaction of its citizens. So that welfare model, that uniqueness of the welfare model that has been there is something which again is needs to be highlighted. Now, having said that, this welfare model and this kind of a picture perfect development that we are talking of, consistent development of the Nordics, I think if it is challenged at all right now, is challenged because of the demographic decline which has been mentioned. So this demographic decline is something which is going to have a lasting impact on the way the societies have been organized, especially the welfare model, which is, again, as I said, pension is something which is a responsibility of the state. So if you have a large number of people who are aging, and you do not have sufficient number of people who are in the workforce, then obviously there is a huge problem in maintaining that. So in that sense, when we are looking at these countries, these countries could be interesting destinations for India so far as mobility is concerned. And therefore, as I said, I'm glad that we are looking at these countries. So if you're for instance, if you're looking at Norway, in 2019, the workforce shortage of Norway shot up to by 20%. So it increased from 2018 levels by 20% in 2019. And it is indicated, the estimates indicate that the number of workers, or the shortage of workers, would be something around 60,000. So for small countries, a shortage of 60,000, one can understand, is enormous. And in 2019 also, 1 in 5 companies reported that they had difficulty in terms of recruitment of labor. And this again has increased from 2018. So there is an increase in terms of shortages. There is a problem with recruitment, finding the right people. And as we will see that this is especially the problem areas or the shortages are in the health and social service sector. This was also mentioned earlier, that this is something which is where India can perhaps sort of match. I can come to this in a minute. So health and social services are the hardest hit, is something which again 2019 shows, where there is a shortage of, or there was a shortage of 12,750. And similarly, there were also shortages in the construction and industry sector, in ICT and engineering. So there are these sectors which we see are important in terms of of filling in labor shortages. And we also see that this is something which is not specific to Norway. This is something which is basically a kind of a demographic decline which all of these Nordic countries are facing. For instance, if we look at Sweden, by 2025, and we are here in 2021, and if you're looking at 2025, it is estimated that there would be an increase of 36% of people who are aged above 80. So aging population in that sense is a reality. And studies also show that between 2011 and 2025, in Sweden, because of this aging population, you also have a high retirement rate, where 41% of the people would be retiring from the public sector. And again, the maximum of people retiring within this will be from the health and social care sector, 42%, from the education sector, 38%, manufacturing, construction, 34%. Is what are the estimates. And some of these municipalities reported that, given this kind of number of people retiring from work, and also given the fact that there is insufficient interest among the young population in these countries, or in some of these municipalities, to pick up education programs or to follow education programs which would allow them to be these replacements to be filled, since there is the insufficient interest. So therefore they would need to look at labor from outside. So the only way that they could replace the number of people retiring would be by looking at people or recruitment from abroad. And this is where perhaps the countries like India would come in. The labor immigration law since 2008 has been in Sweden. It has allowed the employers to recruit from third country nationals, including, especially if there were nobody found from Sweden and Europe. This obviously is a clause which is there, and essentially, but the policy was made or was changed, realizing that there would be problems in terms of filling in labor shortages, and therefore the kind of flexibility to the employer to find replacements. Similarly, if we look at Finland again is aging very fast, growing population, and according to some estimates, it would require again 20,000 to 30,000 people annually to maintain the public services and to run pension benefits. So if you're looking at, again, a small country which has a 5.5 million, around 5.5 million population, if you're thinking in terms of 20,000 to 30,000 recruitments annually to actually keep up the kind of development or the kind of model that we were talking of. So obviously these governments are also worried, right? So the Finnish government, for instance, is worried about how to secure talent, because if you're thinking in terms of also recruiting, you're competing with other states in securing that talent. So there is this worry about how to compete for talent and skilled workers. There was mention about that need for skilled workers would increase. And in Future of Migration Strategy 2020, Finland's Future of Migration Strategy 2020, it states that migration is something which will enhance the well-being of the population. So it is looking at migration and mobility as a positive, right? So so it's basically talking about that it is something which is going to be important, which will it's going to increase the well-being of the population. It is also going to increase competitiveness of Finland. But again, at the same time, it says that migration will be foreseeable. So you will basically determine how it is going to work out, and it would be controlled. So you're talking about the need for migration, but at the same time, obviously controlled migration. Yeah, am I there? Yeah. Because everybody disappeared from my screen, so I wasn't really sure what was happening.
I think you also disappeared now. You're
Okay, okay. So this strategy, this Future of Migration Strategy 2020, talks about the need for young migrants, and that is something again can can be linked to the question of which was or the point which was made earlier about students, having student mobility, and then those students could be a part of the labor force, and that is also something which the government is actually looking at, because it's essentially the idea is that the need is to fill especially the social and healthcare sector, and in that again when we're talking about the social and healthcare sector, the government is aware that it has to basically think in terms of international recruitment. So again, therefore, we can talk about this as an area where we can think in terms of how India fits in, because we know that India has a sufficient pool, or this has been also outsourcing to other countries. And so far as I said, foreign students were concerned, the idea, because the government was looking at young population or young hands, it was also trying to extend the duration of residence permits after graduation. So it's trying to make it an attractive destination by by allowing this kind of an extended duration of residence permits, also providing for language training in the course of the education of your education, and I'll come back to the question of language in a minute. And also practical training. So basically the government's goal, so far as the Finland's government's own goal is concerned, it is basically that it's trying to link in the student migrants with the labor market. So that is something. So they're basically looking at student migration, and they're also using that student migration to actually reevaluate addition to the kind of labor shortages that we have. And since 2009, the process of getting a work permit has also been made easier in Finland, because the prospective employer does not have to actually show that if he is hiring from a third country, he does not need to show that that there is no other applicants who are there employable from the existing pool. So that has also been removed. And then you find that in 2018 Finland has launched the Talent Boost program, which basically is a program to attract labor, and it is basically looking at again attracting labor. Currently what the Talent Boost program 2018 is looking at is health workers from Spain, metal workers from Slovakia, and IT and maritime experts from Southeast Asia and from India. So this is something which we see is what is happening, for instance, in Finland, so far as it's trying to address the question of labor shortage. And this Talent Boost program is under the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Employment, and which this ministry is very clear that that Finland needs skilled workers, skilled laborers, and there's a need to create awareness of Finland globally, so that this is a destination where people can come and work. That is something again the Finnish government is itself trying to project, and so that it's taking this whole idea about competing for workers very seriously in that sense. And in this ministry in 2019, this Ministry of Economic Affairs and Employment identified in 2019, I'm not talking of 2020 and 21, this year is basically the pandemic year, has thrown everything in a different direction, especially when you're talking in terms of mobility. But 2019 figures of the ministry identifies shortages of workers in 54 occupations. Again, there is an increase. In 2017, there was a list which had been about 39 occupations where there were shortages. By 2019, you see there are identified 54 occupations where there are shortages. So what one basically sees is that there are identified areas where workers are needed and to be filled in from workers abroad. And very interestingly, in this list, for instance, the biggest needs that are identified are for doctors, speech therapists, early childhood educators, social workers, nursing associates, And also, as I said, very interestingly, cleaners, cooks. So it's a very kind of a, one could say a varied list in terms of high skilled, and also one could say not that high skilled in terms of if you're looking at cleaners and cooks, right? So this is something which we see in Finland. Similarly, if you're looking at Denmark, we again see that very recently in June, the Danish Prime Minister again conscious about this whole shortage of labor, warned that the labor shortage actually can hamper economic growth. So there is consciousness very clearly, obviously, about the kind of problems which these countries are facing in terms of labor shortage, and then how to sort of augment it and how to address it. Denmark, so far as Denmark is concerned, it actually has a positive list, which is basically a list of occupation which faces shortages. That is, those are identified, and it is some and in occupations which are identified in the positive list, people from outside EU and EEA are allowed to work or are eligible to work, and they get residence permits provided that they have a job offer from a Danish employer. And again, if you look at Denmark, apart from this, also has a green card scheme, which is a basically point-based system, which allows one to live and work based on the criteria, various criteria, like age, language.
Sorry, we can come back to details. I mean, could you just wind up, because then we can.
Yeah. Okay, sure. So basically, the point which I'm trying to make is that there is a possibility, there is opportunity so far as different sectoral shortages are concerned in all of these countries. The four which we have mentioned, Iceland also does have immigration now, which was until very recently homogeneous country, but that immigration is primarily now from Poland. So what is the, in one sense, where could we have what was earlier mentioned as a win-win situation, is to look at these with various sectors, as I mentioned, the healthcare sector especially, because that is going to need attention. But the problem here is the problem of language. So far as mobility from India is concerned, the problem would be one of language. And therefore, the attention when we are making policies would be how to impart those language skills. So for instance, if we have the international skill development centers, which do impart, training on language, and they have modules where they orient the would-be, say, workers to these about the destination countries, that component needs to be very clearly built in, the language training component. But that also has to be done once we establish that these numbers of people are needed, and there is government to government agreement specifically on these sectors. So for instance, if you're looking at the positive list of Denmark, it does mention medical practitioners, doctors, nurses, etc. But then it needs Danish authorization, which means that you can't, even if you have your own, if you have the requisite, competencies or degrees, you can't simply go there and apply and work like in the other positive list jobs. So I think we need to basically look at that. We can come back to it when we have the discussion, but essentially that these countries are important countries to look at if you are thinking in terms of mobility. They are interesting countries, important in terms of destinations. They do need people, so we just need to match those requirements with the kind of pool that we have, because India, according to the talent search report, would be the only country which was basically a talent search report of 20 economies, which said that India is the only country by 2030 which will have an excess surplus of labor, which while most of these countries or all of these countries that it studied would have a deficit. So in that sense, India definitely would be one of the countries which even the Nordics need to look at. Thank you. I'll stop here for the moment and come back perhaps later.
Well, thank you. I know you had many more things to say, but we'll come back to you. And thank you so much for highlighting a couple of points, particularly about the strengths of the welfare model and how this is under stress. And the whole, of course, the demographic pressure. I mean, and then how the student mobility can be, this is what they're linking with the the broader labor market. I think these are some of the points which will be, and the areas where you have mentioned where shortages are likely to happen in some of these countries. Thank you so much. And now we have the next speaker in the panel, Mr. Dr. Heike S. Matila. He's a master's in economics and sociology from University of Helsinki and PhD from University of Geneva, and expert on international migration, and obviously has combined his work experience in government, international organization, and academia. He has worked in the Finnish Ministry of Labor and also in the International Organization of Migration in various places, and since 2014, he has worked with the School of International Training, Switzerland, and many more other things concerning migration, etc. He's done, which I think the CV is with all of us. So, Dr. Matila, you have about 10 minutes or so to make your point.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you very much for the India Center for Migration. It's an honor to be invited to this panel by such an important institution regarding migration. I am indeed of the Finnish nationality, but talking from here, from Geneva, where I have lived since the late 1990s. And when I was preparing for this little intervention, I was remembering my very first time when I came to Geneva. It was in the early 1990s, as I was participating as a young official from the Finnish Ministry of Labor. I was participating in some talks in the Uruguay trade round, and it was related to negotiations and bilateral talks on movement of persons related to service trade. And of course, India, as we know, was very adamant in demanding the countries of the global north that, okay, there should be much, much better access of Indian workers, Indian entrepreneurs into the labor market of the countries in the north. And these countries in the north, though, remained also rather passive in that regard and maintained their rather, let's say, protective immigration control regime. Let that guide these offers in terms of otherwise liberalizing trade. And one of the ways to get out of in this regard and get this Uruguay round concluded was some kind of compromise where a working group was created to further work on and try to resolve this unresolved question, and India was to chair that working group. Now, ever since migration and development problematics have become much more prominent, and new institutions have been created, like the Global Forum of Migration and Development, and the World Bank has been very active and working systematically in watching and monitoring migrant remittances. And of course, we know that the lead expert there is an Indian gentleman, Lili Prata. So we can say that, yes, these trade rounds in trying to ambitiously put together many things have maybe come to the end of their way, as we know the destiny of the Doha development round so far. But these kind of sectoral issues and regional negotiations go on. And here we have come to the point where really now this offer from countries with large labor force reserves and demand from countries where there are shortages. So these are quite keenly now seeking each other. And in that sense, this kind of event is very timely. Now, talking about the Nordic countries, for which Professor Sarkar offered a very excellent overview, so I can then complement it a little bit with some late developments, especially from Finland. we have these countries are rather small, of course, from the Indian perspective. Finland, Norway, and Denmark, population somewhere between 5 and 6 million, and Sweden 10 million. So the market is not very large, but of course, as has been kindly said here, there are many attractions there which would offer a fairly relatively safe destination for migration, and the need is there, and all parties are eager to make business, which would then have this double or triple win possibilities. And as Professor Sarkar just cited certain studies, especially from the IT sector in each country, they are citing quite ferociously in the last years the need and the shortage that is there and is projected for the coming years as in the need of experts. And actually the ball is rolling there already, so there is quite a considerable Indian community in all these Nordic countries, because of course the market has done its work already before the authorities are seizing the issue and are trying to do their share. And somehow, if we look at different sectors or technical niches where these kind of IT experts are now needed, it may be that the pandemic has even accelerated, because there are more and more software needed to arrange this kind of remote conferences. There is more e-commerce, there are cloud services, there is artificial intelligence. So in Nordic countries, which have been quite successful economically in the global market, so there are many disproportional shares of the global market, and also the need for expertise and for top specialists is disproportional as well. But sadly, then there is another disproportionality in terms of the structure of the population. So this transition where there are more and more old people and not enough care workers, it is rather really a real shortage already and worsening, and that is not so easy issue to respond to, because of course the demands are quite specific in the care sector, and as always in labor mobility, the verification of qualifications and competences is always an issue, but there is lots of potential there. And indeed, I was watching yesterday Finnish news, and the finance minister, Mrs. Annika Saarikko, the chair of a Centre Party, she was like opening the final month of the budget preparation, and in her short press conference, she was saying that now, after the COVID and after the economic slump, there seems to be quite good potential for economic growth. But one of the key issues there is to ensure that there is enough labor force, and there needs to be more labor immigration into the country. And actually, Finnish government a few months ago, when they had the midterm conference, they even specified certain requirements or certain quota actually for labor immigration, and also for their goal to triple the number of foreign students starting their university education in Finland. So it's becoming quite concrete, despite of this political climate that sometimes where we sometimes is dominated, or the debate is dominated by populist parties and their rather anti-immigrant rhetoric and rallying technique. But on the other hand, the other political players and political parties, mainstream parties and social partners, employers and trade unions, seem to be quite in agreement that this kind of labor immigration is needed. Otherwise, the country, there would be really this kind of tight place and dire place for the economic growth. I spoke also to former colleagues from the Ministry of Labor who told me that regarding India, there are some pilot projects going on in order to facilitate the immigration of technical and IT specialists, finally to get some kind of a fast track in the processing of work permits. Interestingly, there is a pilot project going on where the recruitment areas are, on the other hand, Silicon Valley, and on the other hand, the environments of the New Delhi. So this is an interesting choice of pilot areas, and of course, the authorities are aware on both sides already on this. But it seems that there is no framework agreement anyhow on labor exchange between the two countries. And always such agreements would be helpful in order to make sure that this kind of recruitment remains ethical as possible, that it doesn't create shortages in the country of origin, and that also that the recruiters would not charge excessive fees, that it would remain in the framework of reasonable formalities. And also then, even if we are talking about these countries with the fairly high respect of the rule of law and human rights and democracy and so on, there still have been cases of exploitation there, especially in the lower echelons of skill scale. And therefore there should be available protection mechanisms and hotlines and so on. So these agreements would be very useful and necessary to ensure such infrastructure for migration, if you would say so. It has been then, as we are talking of fairly different countries here, it has been an observation by the Finnish authorities that it is often this kind of, when an IT specialist comes to Finland, they are anyhow most often leaving the place. They are coming alone, they are leaving, or then the family, if they have come with them, has not really enjoyed their time. So there is a project now in trying to develop and see how the spouses would be taken on board and children into the integration process. So one can say that it is quite a dynamic time then in terms of developing and making it smoother. And the project that I have just joined for a little consultancy in order to map out labor immigration for Indians into Europe, I think that one of the ambitions of the project is especially then to find more about the soft side, that the hard side, the actual, let's say, business and movement is already taking place. But as long as the social and soft side and integration side has not been given enough attention, so the immigration process is not as successful maybe as it could be. About the care sector, as I said, it is can be problematic in terms of verifying and ensuring the requirements of the workers. As we know, also the Filipinos and Filipinas especially are the lead country and lead representatives of migration in the care sector. But there still lacks, at least in Finland, a system of properly upgrade and put into up to date and adapt the education of these nurses that come from the Philippines. And looks have been turned towards Germany, where they have an inbuilt training system that when they get care sector people from abroad, there is a training system putting the skills levels at the proper level. The chair is signaling towards me, so maybe I stop here and will then gladly answer questions and participate in the discussion. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Dr. Matila. I'm sorry because we have to kind of, conclude this thing within the limited time. Yeah, but I think you made very interesting 2-3 points, which I think one is that the overall this is a dynamic time, and particularly the migration issue. And the areas of IT sector, because of the pandemic, I think there are a lot of new opportunities, but I think we also have to, perhaps there's another way also think that looking at because of a lot of things are happening online, maybe there is less need of migration in that sense because many things can actually happen anywhere in the world. So it can work both ways rather than actually looking at just there are more opportunities opening here. And interesting pilot projects, which you have mentioned. I think what we really need to do is to have more and more pilot projects, not just only with Nordic countries, but also with other European countries. So this can really give us good understanding what can be done. And of course, the point which you have made, the framework agreements, which are really very important because ultimately markets are already working, as you said, the market forces, but ultimately it has to be strengthened through government to government or other kind of agreement, then there's less exploitation and other things can happen. Thank you so much. If there are other points, we'll come back to you, sir. And the next speaker we have Mr. Pratik Karlekar. He's, as you know, many of you may know that he's the lead at the Global Mobility HR Shared Services for UK and Europe in Tech Mahindra, which is one of the largest IT companies from India. And he has a wide experience in managing inbound and outbound migration, immigration. So over to you, sir. I mean, you have the industry experience, how things are working between India and you are specifically looking at European countries. So it will be quite useful, your intervention. Mr. Pratik.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Professor Gulshan, for this introduction. Thank you, ICM, for this wonderful opportunity. It's an honor. And thank you, my co-panelists. All of you have covered quite a bit of information already. So with the paucity of time, I would cover up a little bit more about the practical situation in Nordics and Scandinavian countries. So what we have observed so far is the Denmark, which is more diverse economy, in terms of better cost of living. It has a better wealth distribution overall, and it is also one of the oldest monarchy in the world. Denmark particularly has a 10 days or 15 days maximum turnaround time for getting the work permits for IT sector. Or even anybody who qualifies for their pay limit scheme. There are various schemes launched by the Danish government. And these particular fast track schemes are applicable for meeting these certain criteria, such as minimum wages for those particular skill sets, the contracts with the customers and the work locations, the entity, the company's presence in Denmark, and with the special recognition from the city, which is the Danish Immigration Board, you get this fast track membership, which is really useful for us to deliver services in no time for our high demand customers from this region. So there are certain countries that are like this, such as Sweden. Now in Nordics, Sweden is also having a special trusted partner program for large corporates, where the work permit processing time is as quick as about 15 to 20 days. And thereafter, the applicant has to apply for the entry visa at the Swedish mission based in India, if the applicant is from India. We have observed quite a few good global brands in Sweden, wherein it extended an opportunity for Indian corporates to extend the IT export services such as Volvo, Scania, ABB, SKF, IKEA, as all of us know, recently entered India. Electrolux, Skype, Spotify, retail brands such as H&M. These are all originated from Sweden, which is a large economy, which is more populous economy. It is stronger and a robust economy in terms of employment opportunities. We've seen quite a few enhanced experiences from the urban life of Stockholm, Gothenburg, and Malmö. These are some of the urban cities in Sweden. It gives a huge amount of opportunities for IT export and BPS services exports in the region. As India is one of the largest IT export companies, it is a fantastic forum to discuss the opportunities and streamline the more operational modalities on this forum. So I thanks once again to ICM for arranging these discussions. Sweden particularly has got a well-balanced work-life culture wherein people work about 40 hours a week, but hardly any locals or even migrant populations go for overtime because they value the quality of life by way of achieving this work-life balance, so that you actually achieve the overall happiness and satisfaction in personal life as well. So there are about 25 days of at least 25 days of official annual leaves allowed as per Swedish laws. Other than that, most of the Swedish companies and the labor relationships, the employment and employee relationships are based under CBA. So it is very easy to get a job, to live long term in the country. As we heard very rightly said by Professor Baswati and Dr. Matilda, with the aging populations, these governments are offering the permanent residency options as well on work permit holders. So, for example, Sweden, which is quite liberal in offering one of the fastest permanent residency options, which is total 44 months of stay out of 48 initial months of work permit stay in the country. One can apply straight away for permanent residency in the country. Wherein Denmark offers after 8 years of stay in the country as a permanent residency. So this could be part of the long-term solutions towards managing the great vacuum that may come up as an aging population in the coming decade for these Nordic regions. We also observe Finland, which is compared to Sweden and Denmark as a more cost-efficient option. Although climate and the weather-wise, it may not be the best amongst the rest of Scandinavian countries, but yes, it offers a better option for cost of living than Norway, Sweden, and Denmark for somebody who's looking for more cost-effective solutions from these regions. Language is totally different for Finland as compared to Sweden and Denmark, wherein those are more or less based on German language base. Sweden is a little bit different, but still one can understand if has hands-on experience of German language. Norway is again, it's very, very beautiful. It offers a very good work-life culture. It has a great quality of life. So, but it's compared to the rest of the countries. It's easy to find a job in Norway because of the English language spoken widely. All large companies speak English language as their official language of business and communications. But Norway do not have any special programs such as Denmark and Sweden for getting into the fast track work permits into the country. Iceland, again, it's in terms of safety, it is the least crime country. It is fantastic place to stay for safety reasons, for that matter. But it does not have, as I said about Denmark and Sweden, as welcoming programs such as fast track membership or trusted partner memberships to get into this region. So that's more or less about the Scandinavian regions. We do have certain certificate of coverage issued by our APFO office under the social security agreements with these countries, wherein on an average the cost of employer is being saved for almost 10 to 11%. So that's another encouraging reason for having the better quality, best and brightest IT talents being exported to these countries to look after their overall IT and digital objectives at the government level, also at the private sector. So that's it from my side. I'm happy to have any questions or anything more. I hope we have time.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Karlekar. I think you really, in a way, briefly you have mentioned, I mean, where the opportunities are and how, of course, this is a very useful place, very interesting place to stay, and because of the thing which all the speakers have pointed out. So next we have Ms. Christabel Roel. She's director of the Nordic Center in India. This, the NCI or the Nordic Center in India is a consortium of leading universities and research institutions from the Nordic countries, and their objective really is to facilitate, research and among the higher education institutions in the Nordic countries and India, and they have been very active for many years in India. Ms. Roel.
Many thanks, Professor Sachdeva, for the introduction, and many thanks to ICM, Mr. Sanjay Bhattacharya, and everybody present here. Thank you for including me in this esteemed selection of panelists. I'm very happy to be here. So very quickly, to save time, I'm not going into why the region is a promising region for high-quality migration and why there is a Nordic interest in Indian high-skilled migrants, as all this has been addressed by the esteemed panelists before me. Instead, I will address why region is such a great space for Indian students seeking high-quality education and what are the challenges that come with that. So quickly, why Nordic universities? Because they have a very high quality of research and teaching. They employ pedagogy, which is hinged on contemporary research, creative thinking, independent work, as well as collaborative work. They have an inordinate focus on innovation. There is a strong work ethic, there are deep links to working life. They have an academic culture based on equity, access, transparency, quality, social responsibility, and they have a very strong commitment to economic, social, and ecological sustainability, and also to the principle of freedom of expression. So immediately you can understand why there is an increased interest in the Nordic universities amongst Indian students, and also why Indian students are one of the largest set of non-EU students in that region. In 2011, Sweden was one of the first Nordic universities that adopted a fee-paying model for non-EU students. And despite everybody thinking that that would be a deterrent, it did not really happen. You increasingly see from 2015 that the number of students who are applying to the Nordic universities, Sweden in particular, has only been expanding. Despite COVID and all the problems that came along with it in 2020, you still see an increase in the number of students that have applied to Nordic universities rather than a slump. Now, why has this happened? It has happened simply because Nordic universities, specifically Sweden, for quite some time have been applying very sustained, smart marketing strategies to attract Indian students in very specific disciplinary areas. And along with that, we've also expanded worker rights for students. And this means there's a possibility of part-time work for students. They can go up to 25 hours per week. There is a time period for determining employment opportunities post-graduation, anywhere from 6 months to a year. They also have time to establish a startup. They get support for that kind of thing. And you can also see that they do get scholarships, they get funding opportunities. You take Finland, for example. Finland does have a fee waiver for a lot of non-EU students, which has definitely benefited Indian students. Hear me?
Yeah, I think we have lost her. So maybe we can come back to Ms. Rahan when she's back with her connection is okay, or I have lost my connection, I don't know.
No, we can hear you, Professor
Oh, you can,
Sachdeva.
okay, because I couldn't see anybody. Rahan, yeah, you're back here. Please go ahead.
So sorry, I think I dropped.
Yeah, no, please go ahead. Yeah, no, I can hear you.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of got lost in
Yeah.
Yeah, this
So
has
that-
largely worked for Sweden because Sweden very early on applied very sustained smart marketing strategies to attract students in specific disciplinary areas. And you can see that in the south of India, that almost immediately there are certain Swedish universities that have immediate recall value for a lot of students down there. An example is KTH in Sweden. Almost so many, there are pockets of universities which are completely taken over by Indian students because they have applied in such big numbers to these universities. Similarly, you have an expansion of worker rights for students all across the Nordic region, not for non-EU students. So you have a possibility for part-time work. You can do 25 hours per week in most of these countries. You have a time period. You have a 6-month period to a 1-year period for finding employment opportunities post-graduation. You also get support if you want to establish a startup. Similarly, what the Nordic universities have actually done is they've expanded the programs that are taught in English, particularly at master's level. So more and more we see that there's greater engagement with Indian students for the purposes of recruitment. But of course, more can be done. Nordic universities in general are not as visible to the Indian student population as other universities, particularly from the western parts of the world. This is despite all the promising opportunities and the cost-effective nature of the high-quality higher education they provide. And a lot of measures are being taken up to address that. Now, within the Nordic Center in India, we were established for the purposes of increasing higher education and research collaboration between Nordic universities, our Nordic member universities, and our Indian partners, or Indian higher education institutions. But more recently, we've added a third objective to our agenda, and that is visibility of member universities for the purpose of increasing student recruitment. And this has meant that we work more towards, visibility related programs with greater social media engagement and trying to find more platforms for the purposes of information dissemination so that Indian students know about the various opportunities that are available at our member universities. Similarly, Nordic universities have also become more active. They engage more in bilateral formal engagements with Indian universities as against a more researcher to researcher informal engagement that used to happen before. For example, take the case of Finnish universities forming a consortium to work with the IIT related consortium in India. You will also see universities engaging with Indian alumni from their universities. More recently, the Swedes have started SANI, which is a network of the Swedish alumni in India. They've also begun streamlining admission processes so it becomes more accessible to Indian students, but you still have problems with regard to that, which again I will deal with at a later stage. You will also see greater governmental involvement. Now, it's more recently you see more government to government engagement in research. You see more dynamic offices of science, innovation, higher education that are located at the embassies in India, the Nordic embassies in India, and they run very active, fantastic programs for increasing university visibility. For example, Sweden does its Nobel Week. Finland does the Future is Made in Finland series. We also see greater engagement from Nordic business associations in India who are trying to bridge the gap that they find in the job market with Indian degree holders from the Nordic region. You increasingly see Indians who have got degrees from the Nordic universities being employed in India at Nordic businesses that are employed in India. But of course, there are challenges, like, for example, a student who wants to apply to a Nordic university needs a 4-year undergraduate program. Now, hopefully, this is taken care of thanks to the NEP 2020. But in the process, what has happened is that a large number of students have fallen through because they've not been able to immediately go in from their undergraduate degree to a master's program to a Nordic member university, to a Nordic university. Similarly, the admission process can also be more streamlined. One of the biggest issues that come up with Nordic universities are that while some Nordic universities engage and work with recruitment agents in India, a lot of them don't work with recruitment agents in India. And it becomes very difficult for a student to make out who is officially a recruitment agent for a Nordic university and who is not. In reality, in Nordic universities, the processes are so simple in terms of admission that they don't even need recruitment agents. But then this is not obviously visible to an Indian student who's planning to apply. Another issue that comes up is with regard to rankings. only some Nordic universities come up very high in terms of ranking, but some others don't. But this doesn't necessarily mean that they're not high quality institutions, simply because every government regulates the quality of research and higher education within the region. Therefore, a big university which is very prominent and stands up very high in terms of ranking is as good. The degrees can be as good as smaller universities, more regional universities in that region. And that also means that students will have a wider range of universities to apply to if they do want high quality education. Another issue that comes up is with regard to doctoral programs. Indian students are used to a specific model of doctoral programs or entry into doctoral programs, which are very different from Nordic universities. The structure of doctoral programs and entry into doctoral programs are very different in Nordic universities, and most researchers need to be educated as to how to apply, how the structure is, what works, and how the entire system functions. So this also becomes a challenge to researchers who are looking for doctoral degrees outside India. Then there's also for students at master's level, once they do go to these universities, a lot of them do feel that they do not get enough support from the Nordic universities because of many factors. One most important factor is the change in academic culture. The Indian academic culture is very different from the academic culture in the Nordic region. The academic culture there is largely dependent on independent thinking, working oneself or working in groups, things like that, creative thinking, which is not necessarily what students get at undergraduate degree programs in India. So they do have that challenge, at least in the first 1 or 2 semesters, to bridge that. And that itself can be a very difficult thing for most Indian students, especially if they're feeling isolated because of cultural issues, or the climate is something that is making them struggle. So this is something that Nordic universities must take into consideration if they want to make themselves more friendly for Indian students. Another issue that comes up is the issue of finding work after graduation. A 6-month or a 1-year period may not necessarily be enough for an Indian student who may not necessarily have the kind of network that a Nordic student, a native student can have to find employment opportunities within that region. There is also the question of unfamiliarity with the language. While universities do offer the Nordic region as language teaching, as a second, as Swedish as a foreign language, or Finnish as a foreign language, Danish as a foreign language, it's not necessarily enough for a student who is primarily studying in English and who has a very limited kind of life within the university. And therefore, this more emphasis on language support, Nordic universities providing more to students trying to look for jobs. Indian parents who mostly fund their children's education are always looking for value for money. If you send your child and you invest so much of money to get a degree from abroad, it is important that the child actually, or that the student, the child, the ward, gets a job after, so that there is some return on revenue for that particular investment that has been made. So, of course, these are issues that need to be taken into consideration at the university level when they are looking to support Indian students. And also,
can we just wind up?
Yes, sir.
Can you just wind up, because we have very limited time now?
Yes, so the last point that I make is in terms of integration, it's more word of mouth, but we constantly hear that Nordic companies and multinational companies that are located in the Nordic region, it's sometimes difficult for Indian students or non-EU students to get job opportunities within, companies which are located, Nordic companies as such. So this becomes another problem as well, that there needs to be greater integration for the purposes of for the purposes of finding employment opportunities. It's not enough just to get a higher education, get a degree from the Nordic region, but also be very clear about what the employment opportunities are post that. So I stop here. Thank you very much, Professor Sachdeva.
Well, no, sorry to, interrupt you in between, because, we have only 10 to 15 minutes of extra now with us for a general discussion. So now we have a couple of issues. Now, thank you so much, Ryan, for, bringing this issue of student mobility towards these countries, because this is again a very interesting area. And particularly as some of the other presenters have mentioned, that now these countries are looking of linking student mobility with the labor market. So there are a lot of opportunities. And earlier, of course, in some of these countries like Sweden, etc., you had relatively, very kind of free education, but now things are changing in these countries as well. But of course, it's a huge, number of students, those who are going outside, so they can also look this region, which could be. So now what we have is, the picture, what has emerged from this discussion, that this is a very interesting area. This is a, high promising area, I must say, where, of course, these are smaller countries, as I was mentioning earlier. But these are one of the best countries in the world to really live or study or work, anywhere in the world. So all kind of possibilities are there. But it's, so far we have just looked at either student mobility or particularly the IT sector or the healthcare sector. Now, these are of course interesting areas. But two or three other interest areas, which perhaps one is that can we also, so it's becoming quite clear the way the structure of these economies are. So it's going to be really very high skill kind of migration in this area, because other things are, of course, Professor Sarkar mentioned, but in some other areas, but still I think those areas are very limited scope, and not just only in the Nordic region, but in other parts in Europe as well. But interestingly, in some of the earlier studies, we also found that in some of the countries in Central Eastern Europe, you have relatively less skilled labor, which is actually a lot of opportunities are opening up there for them, because their skilled labor is moving to some other parts in Europe. And then still, we haven't really discussed much about the political economy aspect. It's not just, as I was mentioning in the beginning, that the mood in Europe is very, very different as far as migration is concerned. All the numbers have come down, but the politics is still very much dominated by a different kind of rhetoric. And even some of these Nordic countries are also not really untouched by those kind of trends which are happening in other parts of Europe. But overall, I think this is I must congratulate ICM for focusing on this region, and we do need to work to really come out. There is opportunities, but what kind of framework, as Dr. Matila mentioned, you need some government framework at the same time, also a lot of information and student mobility linking with the labor markets, etc. So now we have, at least if we have about 10 minutes or so, if somebody from the participants want to make any comment, any specific question to any of the panelists, we are free now. I don't see any question in the chat box. If somebody, no.
Maybe Professor Sachdeva, I could take the word Gautam Bhattacharya from the Swedish.
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah, please go ahead.
Good to see you, and thank you again to ICM and Secretary and Dr. Singh and Professor Sarkar and Christopher and Mr. Karikar also for all your and Professor Matila. It was really interesting to hear from a Swedish government perspective, and I think that you all picked up. I was really impressed by the wide range of issues that you brought up, but they're all sort of captured what is there. And as somebody said, I think it was maybe Professor Matila, that the companies have gone ahead. Sweden's approach has been open since 2008, and the companies have gone ahead. Our global companies and the Indian IT companies have really forged ahead. We have left it decentralized, and the Indian community has tripled in the last 10, 15 years, mainly IT, but researchers and students. So, I mean, we've really had a hands-off approach. We've opened the doors, and Indians have come. And I think that the Nordic countries in general have had that experience. So, first of all, I think that we should just, at least my opinion is that we are really, until Corona came at least, at a sort of at the cusp of something even bigger, and that it has been a success story for both countries, or for both regions, in India and the Nordic countries. The political economy that you brought up, Professor Sachdeva, is very interesting. I keep a keen eye, being an immigrant son myself, son of immigrants, second generation Indian in Sweden. Of course, I keep a keen eye on the debate and follow the right-wing Sweden Democrats and anti-immigration rhetoric, etc. What I see, and this could be right or wrong, but there is so far no questioning of the high-skilled labor migration, even from the far right. I've seen some of the pronouncements from them, and so far nobody has criticized the fact that high-skilled engineers are coming to Sweden. So what has been in the line of fire are the berry pickers from Thailand, cooks, chefs, cleaners, where the debate goes that we have so many unemployed migrants, why should they come and take our jobs? But Indian IT professionals, researchers have not been questioned. So far, touch wood, I think that has not been a controversy, even at the far right. But maybe others in the audience have a different view. I see the obstacles really being language. I think the private enterprise can take care of a lot, but the language is going to be the obstacle in the healthcare sector, in any kind of people-to-people interface where we have service sectors. You have to learn Finnish or Danish or Swedish, and this will continue. No matter how well we Nordics speak English, we will still want people to speak the native language. So I see an entrepreneur could do something there. There's a need for somebody to maybe skill Indian labor in our languages. If it's doable, I don't know if it's done, and how the Italians and Germans and Swiss, how they solve it, because there are a lot of nurses in those countries. And then you have to certify them. So I see scope, but I see the limitations in the culture and in the language factor. Overall, I just want to say, I don't want to take too much time here. I really appreciate it. I think my colleague Ibrahim Gaya from the Migration Department also is here with me. We really would like to encourage more discussions, and with a little more time, we will also bring in some of the experts from our employment agency who analyze and look at these things so that we can have a fruitful discussion on how to increase the flow. So I just want to thank all the organizers and really congratulate you on a very, very interesting and thought-provoking seminar. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Bhattacharya, for really making very important points concerning, all the issues which we are discussing. And as we were discussing that now in the last few years, it's not just only India, EU. Issues have become relatively more prominent, but in fact, the last 2-3 years we have also seen more focused on the Nordic region. It's not just the India Nordic Summit, but we also had more than almost all the summit meetings have also happened between bilaterally. May I also invite Sita? She wanted to Sita, could you hear me?
Thank you so much. I'm going to keep the video off. I'm sorry, I don't have a great connection.
No.
But thank you so much, and also for the discussion. I just want to say a few things because we've been working on the India-EU corridor for a while. And there are a couple of things to think from both sides. I think one, of course, and I think this is very much for the European side, yes, you brought up issues like languages, barriers and things like that. But, the whole truth is at one level that Europe is kind of lagging behind. There isn't the swiftness to the change in the visa regimes. There isn't, things just aren't perhaps moving fast enough in terms of being able to attract some of the best skills to that part of the world. And I think the work, the mobility partnership that was with Denmark, it might be worth probably studying why it did not finally result in some of these people staying on in Denmark much longer. So that might be worth something to look at. One of the things that we have clearly found and which is coming through all the time is that the funds for integration are coming down with right-wing politics. I mean, that is one of the biggest drawbacks. Mr. Bhattacharya is completely correct in saying that it's not going against high-skilled workers. The openness towards high-skilled workers remains even with a right-wing political space, but the integration efforts in integration are much lower. And certainly, therefore, that has an impact on people who are coming in, things like spouse visas, benefits for children, all of that, which is declining actually for some of these migrants, makes it difficult. But there's one more thing also I want to raise from the Indian side. I mean, for all of us who've, and of course, Gulshan Sachdeva here and many of us otherwise who've been on the Indian side for the last, decades of work on migration, there's been a shift, and it's been a new shift where India is looking at facilitating and, looking at promoting people going out. It was not so a couple of years ago. But our own side, on the Indian side, I think we need to do a lot more coordination, certainly facilitating private sector also to come in and play the roles that they can in a more robust manner. And facilitating that to happen might actually be really helpful. There needs to be much more done on that, but I think that would be a way forward for the Indian side to perhaps take more proactive steps in terms of how this can be facilitated. One last point, sorry, just for a minute, on the student mobility part. I think it's a great way to look at students because they're best adapted to move into the labor market, right? It's much easier if you've spent 2 years in a country to move into the labor market there, if you can get entry, of course, there. But there are a couple of things to think of from the India skilling space. And that is that there's quite a lot of money leaving India when students go out of India as well. Huh? So there's that, but there's also no residual learning being left in India if there's no skilling happening in India. So it's also interesting to perhaps consider going into the future that there is skilling investment made in India so that those learning is transferred backwards as well. And it's not just students going from India and learning there, but also that there is a residual population then here that may not actually join the labor force in other countries, but stays back with some of those skills and knowledge in country in India as well, particularly for sectors like healthcare workers, where of course there's a very large demand in the world, but there is also in India. So I think just wanted to flag up some of those issues. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Sita, for making this point. Now, there is a specific question for Christabel. Could you shed some light on what initiatives have been taken on the language front by your center?
So we have tried initiating Nordic language teaching in India because there has been a palpable interest among students who want to migrate to the Nordic region for the purposes of higher education and people who are skilled labor that are looking for employment opportunities in the Nordic region. But the Indian university, so the problem is that a lot of the funding is linked to the government if you want to have teaching. And I'm speaking specifically with regard to our experience with the Danes. So a lot of language teaching is funded by the government, and if that happens, then what happens? What is necessary on this side is that it has to be located in an Indian university. And most of our conversations with Indian universities have not, been successful because it's very difficult to place a language learning in the module that the Danes or the specific government that is funding the teacher would like it to be in an Indian institution. That is why things have not moved forward. With regard to language teaching, we are making more efforts because, of course, there's a demand, and also because of the similarities between the languages, Swedish, Norwegian, and Danish. I mean, it's not, they have the similar root, of course, but we've not been able to do much. We need to have greater ease both on the Nordic governmental side in terms of supporting these kind of programs, and more openness in the Indian university structure to locate these kind of programs within the university structure, and within the university structure then open it out to students not limited to the university, but people from all over. So sadly, nothing much has happened with language teaching.
Thank you, Christopher. So I think, since we have finished our time, so, I don't want to take much time, but there are 2 or 3 points which really have come out. Unless any of the panelists, they want to make some intervention for 1 minute or so, otherwise I can just wind it up. Professor Sarkar, if you have anything to add, yeah, please go ahead. Just 1 minute because we don't have much time. You have to unmute first.
Question about the political economy aspect, that is obviously very important because immigration, all said and done, is not happening in a vacuum. These are people who are going from one place to the other. There are anxieties on both sides. People who are moving to these countries and where the host countries where suddenly, which have been actually very homogeneous, where suddenly there are lots of new people coming in. So that needs to be really addressed. And what we see in terms of the influence of the far right parties or the populist parties, they're definitely there. I mean, I see that some of the participants have flagged that so far as the high skilled labor is concerned, they're not really objecting to that. But when you create an ecosystem where you basically, constantly putting up ideas or floating ideas which are very, very negative so far as immigration is concerned, it does have a effect overall. And also, how do you, because their essential rhetoric has been around Muslims and Islamophobia. And if it's very difficult to differentiate between a high skilled labor and a person who is, the identity goes with the person. So you can't really differentiate it in this manner in terms of the rhetoric is not for high skilled, but is only for certain people. But those certain people have their identities with them when they move. So essentially, this has a negative kind of impact on the overall prospects of mobility so far as attractiveness of the destination countries are concerned. Because you do so much, you will learn a new language, for instance, if one has to do that. And then make your life there, and then you don't feel wanted. That's really something which people would really look into. I would go on and on, but I'll stop.
Thank you. Dr. Matila, you have anything to add?
Yes, thank you. Well, I can only echo what Professor Sarkar said, that yes, it seems that indeed these populist parties and xenophobic parties with xenophobic message, they do not necessarily differentiate between different, or often do not, between different groups of immigrants. So, and their general messaging and general rallying with anti-immigration platforms is doing harmful work for promoting migration, which is, as anyhow most of the others agree, something useful and something constructive and so on. So I can just say nobody has really the secret wisdom here that, okay, what should we do? But there is some kind of a constant work needed in schools, for the press, for the politicians, to educate them, for the politician to be sharper, for the media to be sharper in somehow limiting the discursive space for these populist parties, who often then very categorically, very sort of generalizingly spread false messages. This is, of course, we know it, all these fake news culture and all that. So it is an issue indeed for which many seminars could be arranged, but it just needs constant working and enlightening the grand public.
Thank you.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Karlekar, any extra point you want to add? Mr. Karlekar, are you still around?
Yes, I think all the points are very valid, and those are fantastic in terms of understanding where we stand as on today. And of course, there is a huge cultural difference between the Indian and the Scandinavian cultures. However, the business languages, the ICM-led programs such as these will definitely enlighten the future migrant workforce to be more competent, to be more adaptable to these different cultures. Definitely, compared to the Indian continent, there is a huge difference in the climate as well. But as and when we are expanding our export services, education, academics, the needs and the readiness of the Indian youth or the talent migrants, I'm sure these we can definitely put behind and look forward for the great integration between the Scandinavian and Indian cultures.
Thank you. Ms. Rohan, anything else?
Just to say that I know the question of integration keeps coming up, but when it comes to finding employment or staying, finding employment for students. But when it comes to university culture as such, you do not find many instances of students not being integrated beyond the point, as in that they face racism or anything of those such extreme issues that the students face. The university space in general in the Nordic region is a very safe space for students, and they face different kinds of issues, but not necessarily issues related to racism and things like that. I think the challenge, of course, is to find employment post-graduation. But otherwise, the Nordic University is a very safe space for Indian students.
Thank you. I think these are very, this is a valid point, because as I was saying in the beginning, this is one of the best places to stay anyway, studies, work, despite certain problems. Now, I think since we finished time, just 2 or 3 points which are really important in this. One is, these are smaller countries, limited opportunities, but still there are opportunities for Indian mobility in these areas. Now, this is quite clear that student mobility is possible. high-skilled labor mobility is possible. But these are not really the areas where perhaps one has to really be very so concerned about, because high skill, many other European countries also trying to attract Indian high skilled labor, particularly in the IT sector, and many of them has not been very, very successful. So perhaps one has to look beyond that. What are the other ways in which certain mobilities can be facilitated? The point which Dr. Mathila also made, one is that the framework agreements are very, very important. So somewhere I think, and lot of homework we also need to do in India, not just only skilling, which Sita has mentioned, but some other kind of mechanisms, where we can really facilitate Indian mobility, not just because high skilled labor, I mean, they can move on their own because they don't stay in one place anyway. Many of the IT sector, they stay 2 years here, 3 years there. So these are the not kind of people where one should be too much concerned. The market force will take care of them. But some other areas where we need to really do some of our own homework. Languages, of course, are important because that can really facilitate big way. And the last question is about political economy, because we can't just ignore that doesn't exist. So unless some of those technical issues, whatever in the context of mobility we are discussing, those issues also have to be linked with the political economy aspects, both in the Nordic region and also in India, how things are changing and how it can be matched. Certain positive things, negative things are happening in all over the world, and post-pandemic world is going to be very, very different world, because many of the assumptions what we had about economies and the work culture and mobility, etc., maybe things are going to change very, very differently, and this is going to apply to all kind of mobilities, including to this region. Thank you so much for everyone participating. Now, I'm sorry we have taken 10, 12 extra minutes. And now over to Surbi. Now we have next closing remarks by Joint Secretary Shri Abagani Ramu. Or Surbi, you can just take over.
No, indeed, Professor Sachdeva, it's JS who will be making the vote of thanks today. So over to you, sir.
Yeah, can you hear me, Ravi?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, particularly the moderator, for very efficiently moderating this today's session. It is very, very important subject for us. Though we have an agreement with Denmark, it is a lot to learn about the area and opportunities for our migration issues. So I would also like to thank all the panelists, Professor Bhasi Sarkar, Dr. Iki Mathila, Mr. Pratik Karlekar, and Ms. Christabel Royan, and especially to get the diverse aspects of possibilities, both of course the opportunities and challenges in that region. And we got very good insights from Ms. Sarkar, particularly on the present situation, what policies they have which can suit us, and especially the areas where the students can gain the benefit of post-study visas. And as Mr. Mathila pointed out, that it is important to have agreements, frameworks which will facilitate. I think that is always in our focus. As I said, Denmark we already have, but we would also look at very seriously on this aspect of having some kind of arrangement, so there is enough protection and for our migrant workers going there. Of course, there are already existing agreements about the pay protection and the insurance part is there, but the ones which we are looking at is to promote more mobility and migration. So with these few words, I think we immensely benefited about today's discussion. This will definitely go into our thinking and policy, and we'll certainly take it forward in converting into some of these decisions to practical areas, to look at arrive at some practical solutions and reach some kind of practical decisions which will help our migrant workers to look at new areas and new opportunities. So I think with these few words, I wish everyone thank you, and I wish everyone a safe and sound health during this COVID period, and all the best to all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
you
Before
very
we
much.
close, let's do a group picture as we do every time for all our discussions. So I would just urge everyone to turn on their cameras so that we could take a group snap. Thank you once again, everybody, for joining us today for this very important discussion. It has given us food for thought for organizing many such discussions in future as well. We will stay connected with all of you. Have a pleasant evening. We will welcome you again very soon. Thank you.